A recurring theme in a lot of my work is the idea of small towns. And to me, there's nothing that resonates more than the idea of going home, or perhaps that you can't go home. I think there's something about a person who has grown beyond who they once were, who they were when their family, when their hometown community knew them, that if they have truly changed, then when they come back home, it's difficult for others to see them as they are rather than as they were. And I think that as a psychological thing resonates with me as a writer. It resonates with me as a human being. Just the idea that you really can't go home again because the place that you were in may or may not have changed, but you definitely have. Today we're going to talk about book 3 of Sawyer Shepherd Chronicles, the middle point of the series. This is a very fun book for me to write, but also a very therapeutic book for me to write, in the sense that I get to work out some of those feelings of like, why can't you go home? Why do you have perhaps hesitant or even antagonistic attitudes towards going home to a hometown? And so like this was a fun book to write in that regard, but it's also, I think it's one of my favorite books that I've written. I enjoy a lot of what I did there. It's also some of the most difficult stuff too that I've had to put on paper. So today on the Didactic Cafe, we will be talking about Bane of Nostalgia, book 3 of Sawyer Shepherd Chronicles, with a little bit of a preview coming up for the next book, which is coming out this week, Fall of Man, book 4. I'm your host, Chad Lehrman. So I think it's important to also kind of point out that if you have not figured this out yet, that Sawyer Shepherd is a little bit like me. I have definitely put myself into this character. I've put sort of who I would be if a few little things had been changed. Like for instance, if my parents had been involved in a international sort of monster fighting thing, that would be me. You know, that would be my sort of story. He has changed as the book has gone on. Like he's different than me now, and by the time we've gotten to book 3 and especially in book 4, there's definitely some changes in who he is. That's the progression of the series. But one of the core things is that he and I share, still to this day, I think we share, is this reluctance to go home, to go back to the town that we grew up in. Our reasons are very different. You know, Sawyer's reasons are that his parents were killed there and there was so much death and destruction to him to associate with that. But for me, it's more the idea of kind of what I said in the opening, that I have changed since I was in high school. There's a lot of me that's the same. I mean, there's some of the things about who I am are eternal in me, I guess you could say. But some of the things that have changed, my outlook, my perspective, my attitude towards other people, it's very, very different. My worldview has changed, and some of that comes from what I think is this small town tendency to believe that the world is that town, that things don't escape it. And I sometimes use the term black hole to describe small towns. And this is not just my small town. This is all small towns. If you look at small towns around America, they exist primarily because people keep coming back to them. These are generational communities. These are communities where families have lived there for decades, and in some cases maybe even centuries. If you have an old enough town to deal with that, and so there is something both good and bad about that. And so when I look at it as a writer, I think I've said this before in another podcast, that I like to take the things that are safest and most innocent and make them questionable, to challenge that. I think that's what makes a reader uncomfortable. And I think that's what adds to fear. I mean, if you look at things like I'm going to reference the book It several times today for several reasons. But one, the idea that a clown is supposed to be this innocent, childlike figure, and then you make that evil. That to me is this idea of true fear. Children being terrifying figures in books. I think that's a very important thing that we can see, that why the innocence being perverted into something wicked and dastardly is very interesting. So I think with that, small towns provide this air of safety and comfort for people. You know your neighbors. You live there forever. Everything is comfortable. Everything is safe. And I think when you have that mentality about a small town, that's a positive thing. I mean, many people say, hey, I want my kids to have that same sort of idyllic childhood that I had, where you can know your neighbors, you can go trick-or-treating to everybody in town because you know everybody in town. You can ride your bike wherever, you can stay out past sundown. Whereas if you get into a bigger city, a lot of those things kind of disappear. There's this theory in sociology called urban anomie, which is basically the idea that a city is dark, scary, and impersonal. And so to set a book, and I think I mentioned this a little bit with Red Hand Rising, I think it's why I struggled to write Red Hand Rising, is that the city in itself is already kind of a scary place. And so to throw in there a supernatural being or a serial killer or some sort of dangerous thing, it becomes almost like white noise to the tension of the writing. It becomes this sort of, oh, well, everything's dangerous, so why wouldn't this guy be dangerous? But if you take this very Pleasantville type little town where everybody knows everybody, everybody thinks everything is great, and then you insert this dark undercurrent in it, that there is something sinister and wicked and evil growing in that community. And perhaps even maybe tilt into the idea that not everybody in a small town is what they seem to be. That right there. I mean, that I remember as a child watching one of the old, I think it was probably the one from the 50s of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or some variation of that. And I remember just this idea of being so terrified that the person you think you know is not who they are. And so that's another theme that I think we see in Bane of Nostalgia. Now, one of the other things I want to talk about before we dive into some brief reading of the book and talking a little bit more about where what trajectory this book sets us on for the next book. I think that nostalgia is a great thing. There's nothing like driving down the road and that song comes on from your senior year of high school when you and your buddies were hanging out and, talking about the future and what things were going to be, and, the girls you liked, or the cars you wanted to drive, or your favorite sports team, and just that sense of last gasp of childhood, if you will. And that's nostalgia. That's the thing. We surround ourselves with this. And it seems like in the 2020s and even in the 2010s that nostalgia has become a big thing. I mean, one of my favorite TV shows is Friends. I was there for the live stuff. I was there when the thing came out. But to see that there's a nostalgia for this show. My family and I just a week or so ago we went to the Friends experience in Dallas, because there's this huge pop-up thing that has started traveling around the country because people want to engage in something from the past. And we like to think that the past is this beautiful, wonderful, good old days scenario. And so I wanted to take the word nostalgia, which has both a positive meaning in the sense of, oh, it makes me feel warm inside to remember this, but also this sort of longing, a longing for things that once were, when in reality, what they once were may not be at all what we thought they were. And so Bane really takes on two things. For those of you who don't know, Bane is basically a reference to the enemy of, or the antithesis of, or the hatred of. The Bane of nostalgia has two ways of presenting itself. Number one, the Bane of nostalgia is that thing that is opposing nostalgia, reality. Reality is the Bane of nostalgia, because reality makes us look deeply into that which we once loved or thought was amazing or perfect or beautiful or holy or wonderful, and shows us that in fact it was a broken, twisted mess, that it was not something that we really and truly should have devoted so much time and energy to. And it makes us long, once again, for perhaps that innocence of not knowing that which we loved was corrupted. So that's one. I think it's the idea that reality comes in and reminds us that the good old days were never good old days. They were always a moment of existence that was very real, which means that there were good and there were bad and there were everything in between. The second part of the bane of nostalgia is that sometimes when we dive into nostalgia itself, it becomes our enemy. That we begin to wallow in that past. We begin to wallow in that what once was. I think it's the idea for me of when you drive past a small town and you see a Friday or Wednesday or Thursday afternoon, you drive past the local high school football field and you see middle-aged men circling the field watching the teenagers play. And you realize that many of them probably don't have kids out there. They're simply reliving those nostalgic glory days. And in a way, that idea that they can't let go of what they once were becomes their own bane. We refer to it nowadays as peaked in high school, that there's this idea of people who look back and go, man, I that was the best time. Like the greatest things that happened to me when I was between 14 and 18 years old. And I just, I get that. There's an amazing thing. Like right now, I'm a teacher at a local high school here where I live, and our football team just won the game that now puts them in the state championship. That is a great thing. That is an amazing opportunity, an awesome experience for these young people. But I sincerely hope that is not the greatest thing that ever happens to them. Because if the greatest thing that ever happens to you happens when you are 17 years old, there's a whole lot of life left that, is just wasted. It's not really impactful to you. I love my high school experience. I had a great time in my high school experience. I also remember vividly could not wait to get out, could not wait to go and find a different world and explore different things. And the truth is, I had some really cool things that happened when I was in high school. But my life since then has been so much more interesting. And I think that's where Bane of Nostalgia kind of takes that darker side of small town living, of the black hole side of small town living. Because many of the people in the story are people from Sawyer's past, people who have not moved on, and literally not moved on. They're still there. Now, to be fair, Sawyer in this book is around 22, maybe 23 years old. He's in his early 20s. And so it's understandable to a point that his friends are still there. But what we see in this book is that many of them are putting down those roots. They're starting to put down that this is where I'm going to set my story. This is where I'm going to live my life. And so I worked really hard to not make those characters one-dimensional and blinded by their city. So I wanted to put that in there. I wanted to show that they were recognizing that things were not all right. And I had to very much take care of these characters because these characters are people I grew up with. So prior to writing Bane of Nostalgia, I reached out to a group of my friends, guy friends from high school. And I said, hey, I'm writing this book. It's kind of like, my character goes home and he hangs out with his friends from high school. And I think there's no better way, since I'm kind of based Sawyer on me, to explore that than to base some of these characters on you. And so I did. I got their permission. They're all cool with it. Their first comment was, are you going to kill us? And I said, who knows? Where the story goes. We'll see. But it was fun to write that and to dive into those things. And there's some autobiographical stuff here. There's some things like experiences that obviously are changed for the world of Sawyer Shepherd. But just events like campouts that we had together when we were younger that weave their way into the narrative of the story. Creepy experiences. Just different things that go along those lines. And so with that being said, I've also talked a little bit about the idea of, I mentioned earlier, Stephen King and It. Each of my books kind of has this sort of mentor text, whether it's a movie or a book or whatever. Well, this one is It. And I think I resonate with the movie and the books, with the exception of that one part in the book that's just ick. But I resonate with that book because it is very much where I find myself often. Here I am as a guy who has moved on from my hometown, and I want nothing to do with it. But there's something, even though I don't want to go back, there's something that still pulls at me from time to time that makes me want to come back. And I don't know what it is. And I think it's the formative years. I think it's that idea that so many of our life-altering decisions happened in that hometown that we feel this nostalgia for it. I think it does a great job of showing that. What I love about the book is the way that it does not stay linear. It does not bounce. It does not stay with one storyline. It bounces from present day and back into the childhood with the losers. And I love that because it's reminding us that the good old days weren't that great. There were great things, but all in all, they were dark and scary. And so with that being said, I think that for me, Bane of Nostalgia was about taking Sawyer Shepherd, who has just come back from a year-long sabbatical, if you will, all around the world, really traveling and learning his craft as a judge, hunting these demons, finding out stories, and also really looking into who he's fighting. Who is Lucifer? Who is Lucius Fur? Who are they? Where are they coming from? What's their intention? And so, like, with that being said, he's now reached this point where he can go home. He doesn't want to, but he's still drawn back. There's a tragedy that occurs. There's the loss of someone that he cared about as a child, a friend who ties into a story that was revealed all the way back in Rites of Passage. And that friend's death is what brings him back and into that world. And very, very quickly he realizes that that weird tugging feeling he always had as a child, that something just wasn't right here, is dead on. Except that it's so much bigger than he thought. Bane of Nostalgia is as much about the battling of our past as it is about realizing how much, no matter how much we hate it, just how much our past shapes who we are today. I have a saying: if you want to know who you are, you have to know where you've been, and you have to know where you're going. Sawyer Shepherd Chronicles, Bane of Nostalgia, is about Sawyer truly finding out who he is, fully leaning into who he is, embracing it no matter the cost, by looking back and looking forward. It's the perfect middle book. It's where everything fits. So I want to read to you a brief passage, and this is, since this is a relatively newer book, it just came out this year, I'm only going to read a little bit of the first chapter, the very introductory first chapter. In the Bavarian Alps, just above Salzburg, Germany, a lone figure hiked higher and higher into the jagged peaks. The person carried little with them, save for the hiking pack on their back that contained provisions and extra layers for the chilled mountain nights. Atop the bag was a small tent, large enough for just one person. For this person had grown accustomed to loneliness over the last year or so, spending savored moments with other people only sporadically, and always with the intent to gather information, rarely for deep, meaningful connection. The figure raised their right hand to brush the long hair from their face. This person, a young man, had always had this habit of brushing his hair from his forehead. But in the last few months, it was less of a nervous tic and more of a necessity. He had once known a beautiful young woman that stole his heart. But then, because life was the way it was, his heart was broken. He loved her still, and with what amounted to his form of hope, he felt sure he still held her deep feelings for him. Sure, she still held her deep feelings for him. But, as they say on social media, it's complicated. You could say that his job got in the way, or that he simply had too many demons to deal with for a relationship. You could even say that they became different people. But those cliches only pointed to more profound truths, horrific truths. His job did get in the way. It was dangerous, life-threatening for him, and any that went around with him. He had lost almost everything and everyone he had ever loved because of his job, even before he had taken it. Then for a brief, shining moment, he had a new life, new family, new home, new purpose. Then destiny called. He did, in fact, have too many demons, only they were not metaphorical, they were horrifically real, and odd and beastly, and murderous. These demons were massing, forming an evil army under the leadership of one entity that just so happened to be the greatest evil of all time, Lucifer. To make the stand he had to, the man left that family, that new life, and set out to discover who he really was, which made the man chuckle. The last time he had set out to find himself, he had stumbled onto the journey he was on now. But he also had to find himself once again because he'd become a completely different person. He was possessed of a new set of supernatural skills. This was due to the interactions of the zeitgeist individualism, or indie. One of a family of celestial beings that were empowered by the collective beliefs of human cultures, but at the same time had incredible influence to shape human perspective. He had to leave his new home and face a terrifyingly vast world on his own. During this time abroad, he had learned the zeitgeists were essentially lower-level angelic beings. That path had lasted over a year and a half. He had left his home in April of a year ago and was now late September of the next year. He had departed as a 19-year-old kid, and now he had just a few months shy of turning 21. He had met interesting people, learned his own heritage and lineage, and faced new evils. Each step of his journey had changed him. He liked to think of it as sort of a forging, like the supernatural gladius that bounced on his thigh had once been forged millennia ago, formed from the nails used in the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth. The sun broke through the heavy cloud cover in the Eastern European mountains, and a bright ray of yellow fell on the face of Sawyer Shepherd. Bane of Nostalgia is, as I said, the center point book. I highly encourage you. I love this series. I love it, love it, love it. And I know I'm biased because it's my child. I wrote it. I think it's great. I love this book. I love this series. But I encourage you to go out and grab Rites of Passage, Red Hand Rising, and Bane of Nostalgia, because this coming week, I'm going to go ahead and state my day for this. This Wednesday, December the 15th, right? Maybe? Yeah, we'll say that. Wednesday, the Wednesday of the week that's coming up, whatever day that is. If that's December 15th, we're on target. I'm looking at my calendar as I speak, sorry. But basically, yes, Wednesday of this week, December 15th. I want you to know that the next book, Fall of Man, comes out. And guys, this is, as much as I love Bane of Nostalgia and the things that were there, I love what happens in Fall of Man. This is I go for it. Like, this is the book where I wanted this to be my, ultimate, this is bad situation. And so I want to briefly talk about that and the idea that Fall of Man is the book I want to write that talks about not a dystopian situation, but how it gets there. Like, how does the world reach the point where everything has fallen apart? And so Fall of Man is that story. It will pick up immediately after Bane of Nostalgia. Directly, everything leads right into it. So it is a streamline here. And in all honesty, from here on out, the series is that. And there's no more time gaps. There's no more time jumps, except within books themselves. And it is a straight shot until the end of the series. And guys, I really want to tell you, I believe in this book series. I know I wrote it, and I know that it is perhaps me being a me and saying, hey, buy my book, being the ultimate, hey, salesman guy. But guys, I really believe this is a book series worth checking out. If you like Harry Potter, if you like Percy Jackson, if you loved Sam and Dean Winchester on Supernatural, I really think that Sawyer Shepherd Chronicles is a book you'll like. So I encourage you, pick it up, check it out. And then, like I said, this Wednesday, be looking for it. It'll be popping up on Amazon. Fairly soon after that, I'll try to get it up on Barnes & Noble as well, in paperback version anyway. But be looking for Bane of Nostalgia. Be looking for Fall of Man. Because when you get done with Fall of Man, I want to hear people begging me to finish with the final book. Because it is definitely the biggest cliffhanger I'll ever end a book on. Or not ever, but I have ever ended a book on. So anyway, so that today has been Didactic Cafe. Again, my encouragement to you guys is, I want you to think about your own nostalgia. Like, what is it that you look at in your past that perhaps you look at with rose-colored glasses? Remember that perhaps your youth was not as idyllic and perfect as you thought it was, but that doesn't mean it was less. That just means that perhaps it has different shades. And it's important to remember those shades, because those are the shades that make you who you are. This has been the Didactic Cafe. I'm your host, Chad Lerman.